why people attack who is saying something rather than what they're saying. You're watching Making Sense with Robbie. Let's get started. And today I want to talk about ad hominems. I kind of really hate it when people attack the person who is saying something rather than what they're saying, rather than looking at the facts. And a good example of this is I was telling someone about Curry Mullis and some of the things that he had said, some of the things that he believed, and even just talking about his discovery that he made. And the person's response was, well, wasn't he the guy who used his Nobel Prize money to buy a house so that he could go surfing? And this is kind of like an attack on him rather than what he said. I think it's pretty common to sort of attack the person, attack things that they do, rather than looking at what they have to say, rather than looking at the evidence. Just for some context, ad hominem is to the person. It's short for argument ad hominem, and it refers to several types of arguments, some, but not all of which, are fallacies. Typically, this term refers to a rhetorical strategy where the speaker attacks the character, motive, or other attributes of the person making an argument rather than attacking the substance of the argument itself. What this is about is that when someone responds to an argument, they attack the person. They talk about the person, about something they've done in the past, the mistakes they made, things they've said before, in opposed to actually addressing their arguments, addressing what they're saying. And if you're seeking the truth, if you're looking for the best explanation, the most reasonable explanation, then it doesn't matter who says something. What matters is the facts, the evidence, and sort of the reasoning of those thoughts. An ad hominem is a situation where instead of looking at what the person is saying, you look at the person, you attack the person, you criticize the person, you say things about the person that are true or not true, but that discredit the person rather than the idea. And oftentimes, people won't even address the arguments, right? They'll just jump right to the fact of saying, well, this person said this, they said it for this reason. A big reason why these sorts of attacks can be used is because nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. They have flaws. They've said stuff in the past, especially public figures will have said things in the past that were wrong, that they don't believe in anymore, or that they were mistaken in saying. And so there's always going to be this sort of evidence that exists out there to discredit people. Some people, they just make bad decisions. They maybe someone is an expert scientist on a topic, but they're just not really a good person. And so that could be, an influence over what they're saying, but it could also not be an influence. A lot of times the news will attack the person who is making a comment rather than even addressing what they're saying. And again, this is probably related to sort of appeals to emotion, because if we have emotional responses, if we think that someone's a bad person, or we're scared of a person, or we think that they've done bad things in the past, then we'll maybe be less likely to listen to what they have to say, or we won't look at the evidence, we won't look at the facts, we won't look at what they're saying. We'll just sort of see them as a bad person who shouldn't be listened to. A good example of this is someone like Jordan Peterson. So a lot of times they'll say that he doesn't respect people's pronouns, and they'll kind of say that right away before they start talking about him. Whether or not that's true, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that it makes him look bad. An ad hominem is kind of the opposite of an appeal to authority, because with an appeal to authority, you're saying believe what this person is saying regardless of the facts. And on the other hand, with this ad hominem, you're saying don't believe what this person is saying despite the facts. Who says something hardly matters at all. If someone is a serial liar, if they've been caught spreading mistruths or misinformation in the past, then yeah, that is something to look at. That's something to consider when considering their arguments, considering what they're saying. But that doesn't mean that the evidence that they're presenting currently at the moment is true or false. It just means that maybe should be sort of a factor in judging the truthiness or falseness of those statements. When we attack a person, or when someone gets attacked, before you even hear what they have to say, then you kind of think about those attacks, you have an emotional response, and then you sort of disregard the facts or what the person is saying, and you don't think about them. Sort of a way that this can happen, or this is done, is by poisoning the well. Someone might present to you a person and they'll say, well, this person is a conspiracy theorist. This is sort of a way of sort of getting ahead of the story, getting ahead of sort of your thinking. And again, this is anchoring a little bit, because by setting the tone, or by sort of framing where the conversation can go, then you're sort of influencing the way that people understand it, but also you're maybe appealing to emotions, and so you're asking people to have an emotional response rather than a rational, reasonable response. Then, or the person can start presenting their argument, presenting their points, but at this point it's too late, because the well has been poisoned. The audience or the observers already have this negative perspective of this person. They've already have these ideas about the person. And so it doesn't even matter anymore what the person says because their ideas have been framed. Their ideas have been sort of influenced too much. And again, this is like something that people do when they don't want you to look at the arguments. They don't want you to look at the facts. Instead, they want you to focus on something that really doesn't matter to an argument, that doesn't really matter to whether or not something is true or false. And a good example of this, or like a really specific example of this, is someone like Alex Jones. And so Alex Jones is kind of, has a poisoned well. Like lots of people have really strong feelings about him, and they don't think that he is an honest person, or they think that he's a conspiracy theorist. They think he's a liar. Anything that he says, regardless of the facts, like regardless of the truth of it, is going to have a sort of a negative perspective on him, or is going to be put into a negative light. And I thought it was kind of interesting when Alex Jones was on Joe Rogan, because Joe Rogan kind of stopped him every once in a while and actually like looked at the evidence. They like found the articles supporting what he was saying. It was interesting to see that, because a lot of times people will just use ad hominem attacks against Alex Jones and say that nothing that he says is true. This interview showed that like a lot of the things that he was saying were true. But like what all of these sort of attacks depend on, or what this always depends on, is getting people to think about the person who's saying it, the motivations for saying it, why they're saying it, instead of looking at the facts, instead of looking at the evidence. What matters most is the facts. What matters most is the evidence. What matters most is the reasoning or the rationality of that information. And it doesn't matter who is saying it. And so like anytime that someone attacks a person, they're trying to get you to not think about what that person's saying. They're trying to misdirect you or direct you towards like an emotional response to the person, and opposed to what that person's saying. And you need to hear what that person's saying, be able to look at it, be able to make sure whether, or to understand whether or not it's true or false. It's hard. Like things are complicated. And if you can just sort of turn off some thinking because you have these negative thoughts or these negative feelings about a person, then like you don't have to actually look at what they're saying. You don't actually have to verify what they're saying or confirm what they're saying. And this is sort of an easy way to sort of get people to think about things in a way that is sort of works for the powerful, that works for the systems that exist. Because when you get them to like focus on these factors that don't matter, then they don't have to look at the factors that do matter. They don't have to look at the evidence. They can just sort of make up their mind on the fly in a way that is beneficial to those presenting the story, or to those who are already in control and have the power. I'm not going to pretend that the person doesn't matter. Like sometimes you have a liar, sometimes you have like a non-expert pretending to be an expert. Like sometimes you will have people who it does matter a little bit about who they are. It does matter that they have lied in the past. But that means maybe you should be more cautious about what they're saying. You should be more have more scrutiny when analyzing their facts. But just because someone, might have been dishonest in the past doesn't mean they're being dishonest now. And like part of it could be too, like they could be called a liar or dishonest because that's well poisoning. Like there's been attempts in the past to make them look like bad authorities or make them discredit them. That could be the reason, right? Like that doesn't always the reason. Like obviously sometimes people are bad, sometimes people are dishonest, but like just to sort of rely on those sort of previous arguments or those previous statements isn't necessarily being fair to the current argument, being fair to current circumstances and context. So don't get me wrong, like it's always important to look at someone's motives. It's important to look at like why they might be saying something, sort of what they have to gain or what they have to lose if what they are saying is true or false. Like those things matter. They're always a factor. There always should be a part of your understanding of a situation, of what someone is saying. Make sure that you aren't disagreeing with the person. Make sure that you are focusing on disagreeing with the arguments, disagreeing with the facts, disagreeing with the evidence, because that is what matters. My question to you is, like, are you disagreeing with someone because of who they are? Are you falling for ad hominem attacks? Are you actually looking at the evidence and the facts, or are you relying on a personal attack of the person who's saying them? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this entertaining or informative, click that like button because I'd really appreciate it. If you are curious about learning about how to think about things, but you don't want to be told what to think about them, then click that subscribe button because that's what I'm here for. You've been watching Making Sense with Robbie. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk next time.